Father David here. It's Sunday and time for your weekly sermon. And this week's gospel lesson is that wonderful story of Mary, Martha's sister, breaking open that bottle of beautiful and expensive perfume and pouring it over Jesus' feet to prepare for his burial, and the consternation that Judas has over this act of kindness and mercy. Today's gospel lesson is entitled Paradox and Irony. Well, shortly after Vladimir Putin began his illegal war in Ukraine, he said, "A man has no greater love than to lay down his life for his friends," quoting Jesus in defense of his horrific invasion of Ukraine. He's not alone in misusing scripture and faith to justify human arrogance. Christian nationalists also shamelessly turn their supposed belief into Christianity, using Jesus himself to justify racism, misogyny, and nationalism. It seems we all want to have God on our side, whatever that side may be. But as Lincoln correctly observed, my concern is not if God is on my side, but if I am on God's side. Our faith and scripture that guides it is holy and ancient and profound because it meets us in complexity and the messiness of our everyday lives. And in that meeting, challenges us to ask, who are we and how should we act? So it comes as no surprise that Scripture is very often not what it seems at first glance. It's not so much a rule book for how to live your life as it is a deeply ironic reminder of how different God's ways are from our ways. In fact, God seems to enjoy upending our expectations so that just when we think we've got it all figured out, lo and behold, something completely unexpected happens. Today, that unexpected happens with Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus. And you know Mary. We first met her quietly sitting at the feet of Jesus while Martha was scurrying about getting dinner ready for her guests. And when Martha, the attentive host, wants Mary to help out and complains to Jesus about that fact, Jesus upends her expectations, insisting that Mary is right where she needs to be. So much for good manners. In fact, when I was growing up, whenever that story was read in church, my mom would accost the priest afterward and demand to know where Jesus is coming from and why his values are so messed up. Well, today, that same unproductive Mary blows 300 denarii on a bottle of perfume, almost a year's pay. What would you think if your unemployed sister popped open a $10,000 bottle of wine to share with her friend who was on her way out? But this time, it's not Martha who's going ballistic. It's Judas. Judas, apparently forgetting that just last week Jesus fed 5,000 with a few fish and a couple of loaves, wants to sell Mary's perfume to feed the poor. And perhaps because St. John is worried that we'll take Judas at his word and his concern for the poor at face value, he whispers in our ear, Judas is a thief. It seems the guy who's entrusted with the community purse has itchy fingers. And the irony continues because Jesus is here to save the lost. And who is more lost than Judas? Will God's grace ensnare even God's betrayer? And then there's our old friend Lazarus, who just days ago lay rotting in the grave. The irony being that because Lazarus was raised from the dead by Jesus, the religious big shots decide to put Jesus to death. And by freeing Lazarus from the grave, Jesus condemns himself to the grave. You'll remember the scheming that went on in high places after Lazarus stumbled out of the land of the dead. That's when Caiaphas, the high priest, utters those infamous words, "It's better for one man to die than for the whole nation to be destroyed," which drips with its own irony, since in Jesus' death, not only the nation, but the whole world is saved. Lazarus is raised from the dead by Jesus, assuring us that in God there is only life. And yet Caiaphas, the high priest of God, is plotting to kill the ultimate sign of God's love, Jesus. And if all of this is giving you a headache, just wait till Jesus moves from irony to paradox. Paradox as in, if you want to live, you need to die. If you want to be first, be last. These are not obvious truths, which is why we don't interpret Scripture, but rather Scripture interprets us. These paradoxes of Jesus are intended to shake us up, allowing us to glimpse something of the majesty and awe of God. And yet that majesty and awe is itself full of paradox. When St. John tells us about the glory of Jesus, he's not talking about Jesus sitting on the throne in heaven. He's talking about Jesus hanging in agony from the cross. For John, the judgment of God, it's not rejection or condemnation. It's mercy. It's compassion. It is undeserved love. Irony and paradox continue in the tomb even after Jesus is killed. You'd expect that after the resurrection, Jesus is done with his work. He'll return to the realm of his Father. But as our Apostles' Creed says, when he's raised, he doesn't go up. He goes down, straight to hell, where the unthinkable happens, because God's love reaches the deepest depths, to the most undeserving, reminding us that God is present in all creation, even to the very depths of hell itself. That while we may lose touch with God, God never loses touch with us and always holds us tight. Paradox and irony refuse the easy answers because the answers that matter are never easy. Paradox and irony tell us that the answers to the really important questions cannot be known, at least not on our terms. And that's exactly what Paul is seeing today as he begs us to resist the temptation to know all the answers. Because when he knew all the answers, he killed people in the name of God with a clean conscience until God knocks him down and opens his eyes. In Paul's time, the great debate was about whether circumcision was required to be a member of the church. Today, the great debates focus on rules regarding people of certain sexual orientations, or whether one's gender permits one to serve in the ministry, or whether certain kinds of failures are simply unforgivable. Paul loved his rules until, on his way to Damascus, all fired up to demonstrate his zeal for God, God knocks him down on his keister and gives him a long time out to reconsider his entire approach. Paul comes to see that all the rules in the world aren't worth a pile of skybala. That's in the Greek. And yes, it does mean what you think it means. Because once he's let go of all that skybala, what Paul comes to see, what Mary sees every day, what Judas never saw this side of the grave, what those who use Scripture to advance their own political agendas never see, is that God is a gracious giver who rejects all violence, who will go anywhere and everywhere to embrace every last human being. And so to follow Jesus means to become a gracious giver, even when the giving isn't returned, even when it's not deserved. And there is this. We are invited to recognize that it is not us, but the power of God made strong in our weakness that transforms our lives. It means questioning easy answers, rejecting airtight cases so many make when telling us about the who and what of God. It means identifying and letting go of old angers, old hurts, old resentments. Jesus invites us into the deep, even when that means we don't have all of the answers, even when the way forward seems murky and uncertain. In some ways, it's the contrast between Judas and Mary. Mary gives all she has to Jesus, the expensive ointment poured over his feet, wiped with her hair, a beautiful, even sensual moment. So odd in a culture where a woman's hair out in public is always tightly braided and hidden from view, yet today fully arrayed, spreading the scent of precious oils. She places all of her life in his service. She asks for nothing in return. And then there is Judas, rejecting the gift, reducing the fragrance of pure love into cold, lifeless cash. Money for the poor is not a bad thing. Wanting God to be on our side is not a bad thing. But these are examples of how sometimes the good can be the enemy of the best, of how often we try to control God rather than surrendering control of our life to God. But if we take the risk, if we jump, trusting that the net will appear, then he will take us to places of unimaginable joy and infinite wonder as we allow our lives to unfold in paradox and irony. God bless you all.